Mr. Ray, seconded by Ms. Crombie, moves that this House do now adjourn. Debate. The Honourable Member for Toronto Centre.
Speaker, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak in this debate, Mr. Speaker. I think it's unquestionable that we face an urgent situation in Egypt at the present time. Any Canadian watching the news tonight will be aware of the level and degree of violence in the streets, as it appears that there is active fighting between the forces that are closely tied to President Mubarak and those that are demonstrating for significant change in Egypt. And I really want to focus my remarks, Mr. Speaker, and I want to emphasize that I will be sharing my time with my colleague from Don Valley East. But there are some events taking place even now. Nous venons d'entendre, Monsieur le Président, que des employés du Radio-Canada ont été attaqués dans la rue. Et si ce n'était pas pour l'activité et l'intervention de l'armée égyptienne, c'est possible qu'ils auraient été bien blessés par les attaques physiques qu'ils ont subies. Monsieur le Président, je veux concentrer dans mon commentaire sur deux choses surtout. D'abord, la question de la protection, si vous voulez, l'activité consulaire du gouvernement canadien, la politique du gouvernement face aux problèmes, face à la situation. Et deuxième point, naturellement, la question de la crise qui n'est pas limitée au Caire ou au Égypte, mais qui reste toujours un grand défi pour toute la région. Mr. Speaker, I simply want to say a couple of things in the debate, and there will be a chance for questions, I know, and asking some more questions to the government with respect to the activities of the Canadian officials and what's happened. I want to make it very clear, Mr. Speaker, that on our side we recognize the great hard work of people who work on behalf of the citizens of Canada and the very difficult circumstances in which our embassy officials in Cairo found themselves over the last several days. But, Mr. Speaker, the underlying challenge is this, and we saw it emerging from the Lebanon crisis, and that is that Canada consistently finds itself under-resourced, without enough people on the ground, and without a sufficiently determined response time from the government in Ottawa. And just as we saw in looking at the Lebanon situation that we were behind in our response, and in fact there's a very valuable report coming from the other place that refers to some of these difficulties and challenges, so too, Mr. Speaker, we see that in this particular instance there were many Canadians who had a great deal of difficulty in finding out about the circumstance affecting their loved ones, their children, their cousins, those who are part of their families. And we also saw those people themselves facing a challenge as they tried to find out information about how they could possibly get out of the country. Mr. Speaker, I know that the Minister took great offence yesterday when I asked him a simple question based on facts. The fact of the matter is that Canada faces a problem. Far too many of our personnel are here in Ottawa, and not enough of our personnel are working on behalf of Canada overseas. That is a problem and a challenge which must be faced up to. We're also not always using the most up-to-date technology in how to get a hold of Canadians and how to make sure that they're available. The one thing we know for certain, Madam Speaker, is that this is an issue that it's not a matter of looking back and saying who did wrong and who goofed up. One thing we know for certain is that we will face in the future more of these situations. This is the world we are living in. We're living in a world in which there are difficult, either man-made difficulties, political difficulties and challenges, or ones in which there are natural disasters, and we simply have to improve our capacity as a government to respond to the critical situation. That, I think, is the first point that we want to make. But the second point I want to make, Madam Speaker, is this, and that is that none of us, I think, could have anticipated the extent and the pace of change which has taken place in the Middle East. Countries which seemed from the outside to be extremely stable, deeply repressed, yes, oppressive, yes, hierarchical, yes, virtual dictatorships, yes, but nevertheless stable, are now profoundly unstable. And profoundly unstable because their people are expressing a very simple reality. They have had enough. More than half the population of Egypt, Madam Speaker, is under the age of 30. It is a young country. It's a country with a 5,000-year-old civilization, but it is a young country. It is a young country in which people are becoming better and better educated, in which people are increasingly learning of all of the challenges of globalization, all of the opportunities are in place. They see an economic and social system in which they're taking advantage. The revolution in technology of Twitter and Facebook and the social media, which has taken over the younger generation, which is allowing them to communicate one with the other, allowing people in Tunis to communicate with people in Cairo, allowing people on the street in Cairo to say, come out for a demonstration, and tens of thousands of people come out. It isn't possible to ascribe what has taken place and what continues to take place to political radicalism or to a particular ideology that is in place, although that obviously has a role, and we must recognize that presents us with a challenge. But, Madam Speaker, we have to understand that this is a part of the world in which all of the theories about social change and political change are actually being put to work on the street. Now, Madam Speaker, we have always said as a party, and indeed the government has made the same point and others have made the same point, many others have said it, it is not for us as Canadians to determine what the outcome in Egypt is going to be, but it is important for us to state today that it is very clear that the steps that have been announced by President Mubarak with respect to his own plans and with respect to the plans that he is supposedly putting forward for political reform, those steps that he has announced are simply not sufficient to deal with the extent of the concern and with the extent of popular reaction to the regime. This is not any form of outside interference, Madam Speaker. This is a simple statement of the facts. This is a simple statement that what has been done so far is clearly not having the effect that we all want to see. Now, Madam Speaker, there is a legitimate concern in stability as much as there is a legitimate concern in democracy, because we all know from our own lives that without a degree of stability and without personal security, it is not possible for us to see working democracies really advance. But we do not want to see a time when governments use the security and the stability argument as an excuse for further repression. And we want to state categorically on behalf of this Parliament, we affirm the dignity of every person around the world. We affirm the dignity, we affirm the human rights, the right to the rule of law, the right to democratic assembly, the right to peaceful assembly, the right to freedom of religion, the right to freedom of expression, and we don't see these as being confined to any one country. We see these as values that are indeed universal, and they are contained in the documents that are expressed by the United Nations itself in terms of the rights of every person in the world. And so there is a profound movement for democracy that's underway in the Middle East. It's an extremely encouraging and profound movement. And, Madam Speaker, it's important for this Parliament to state very clearly to the Egyptian people, we are with you in your struggle. We are with you in your quest for democracy. We are with you in your quest for stability. And we say to all the people of the Middle East, and I would say most emphatically, including the people of Israel, we value the peace and stability which has been achieved at such great cost, and Canada will stay involved and stay engaged in the peace process to ensure that the democratic change, indeed the democratic revolution that is now underway in Egypt, in Tunisia, in many other parts of the Middle East, does not take away for 1 second or 1 jot for the need for peaceful coexistence between Israel and all its neighbors in the Middle East. Madam Speaker, I appreciate the chance to speak in this debate. I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with members opposite. I do not see this debate as an opportunity to take partisan shots one with the other. It's a chance for us as members of Parliament to have a thoughtful exchange on what we think is taking place, on what we think Canada can usefully and productively do to be a constructive partner for peace as well as a constructive partner for justice and democracy. That's the kind of foreign policy we want to see, a Canada that is deeply engaged in the world, because as I often say, Madam Speaker, the world is in us and we are profoundly in the world. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to thank the Honourable Member for raising this issue in the House. He rightly pointed out that this is indeed quite a monumental historical times.